Just this week, a top official of the Nigerian's Debt Management Office appeared before a committee of the National Assembly where she expressed, among other things, that our country's current debt level is 142 trillion naira. I'm sure you heard me correctly. Not debt in the hundreds and thousands or millions of naira. A national debt burden that is now 142 trillion naira. It's tragic that a nation blessed with human and natural resources cannot manage these resources for it to enthrone some level of prosperity for its citizens and growth in its national economy in a way that both prosperity and growth ensure the good life for its citizen. Again, that is the tragedy of the Nigerian condition. Mrs. Oniha, who to the consternation or shock of members of the National Assembly who were present at the budget hearing or analysis at the national conference, did say that the debts, in the region of 142 trillion naira, were incurred by the three tiers of government in our country: the federal, the subnational states, it's at six subnational states plus Abuja, and local governments in our country. The 142 trillion naira, if I heard that correctly, does not include debts owed by other institutions or owed by non-state institutions. A fundamental point we must ask ourselves at this point, that with such humongous amount of debt owed by Nigeria to multilateral and bilateral lending bodies and institutions around the world, the question we very ask ourselves is this: what did he use these sums that we borrowed from these bodies on and for? In a country where our hospitals are in decrepit state, our roads have remained impassable, our schools have become like kennels, established for dogs. Insecurity has become our harsh lot. We ask ourselves again, what did we use the 142 trillion naira for? It's rather unfortunate that almost 20 years after a government secured some sort of amnestied freedom from debt, for our country, we have again found ourselves in that debt trap. Rather than getting eggheads, to develop schema, template, frameworks to grow and prosper our nation rather. What our politicians do is ruin our collective roast each day by running to the West, running to metro capitals of the world with plates and bowls and cups and bags, begging for loans that invariably have become the 142 trillion naira debt we owe as a country. A few days ago, I sat down, I calculated per head across demographies of our country, per man and woman, children, born and unborn, that feed into the 250 million naira, 250 million Nigerians, that we have, including those that are unborn. And I came to the conclusion that each and every Nigerian, whether born or unborn, has 585,000 naira on his or her head as debt burden. Tragic, I hear you say. Let's move on again. One talking point this week is the incessant namings of public institutions after personages of power in our country. Just this week, the military high command, in commissioning a military barrack in Abuja, named the brand new, let me put it in Nigerian speak, brand new, after President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. This is one of many namings that have taken place since Bola Ahmed Tinubu came into power. You recall that a few months ago, a library complex right inside the National Assembly was named after the president. Just last week, when a bill on the establishment of Polytechnic in Abuja was made public, the Polytechnic was named after Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The fundamental question we ask ourselves, why these namings, after an individual who has barely spent 2 years in power in our country, 2 years of ruination, of our country. You look at the length and breadth of our country, all we find are ruins. All we find are Nigerians struggling under the heap, the weight of the terrible economic, new imperial economic policies that this government, reels out day in and day out. There's nothing stellar about the leadership of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. For him to be clothed with that specter of naming that we now find in our public space. A fundamental question again we'll ask ourselves, are we turning our republic into Mobutu's republic, where institutions during the reign of the Zairian strongman, were virtually named after him? If you look around the world, even countries with authoritarian rulership, you don't find that commitment to naming of public institutions after their leaders. So why is Nigeria setting an example that is strange to our history, that is strange to governance as we have known it through history in our country? You expect such namings to take place in countries like North Korea, where politics and governance are driven by the strong arm tactics of the dictatorial leader, or in China, where power is centralized around the leader of the Communist Party. But strangely, in China, you don't find institutions named after the political leaders of the communist parties. Perhaps because when the leaders of China sat back in 1949 during the CCP, one of the CCP conferences in China, they agreed that places must not be named after the political leaders of their country. That's why today you don't find institutions named after political leaders in China. We're a democracy, our country, our leaders our leaders pretend to the Democrats. We expect them to imbibe some of the cultures, values, attitudinal practices that we find in true democracies. But here, all we do, maybe it's part of the specter of eye service that has become the lot of our country. People wake up in the morning, just name institutions without recourse to processes before political leaders. Finally, another talk point, also raises the point, a fundamental question, if you like, has our country been turned into a republic of liars? Just last week, we were told by Mr. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu that 100 Nigerians who he termed as financiers of terrorism were jailed. There is this question about where and when were they, when were they arrested? Where were they jailed? We know that there are questions about terror financing in our country, but we also know that there has not been any strategic effort, whether tenors, by this government to address terror financing. That's why for us here at Online Television One, we find the claim by Mr. President as false. Until we meet again next week, have a brilliant week. Stay safe. God bless us.